Hello, TTO 2020. I'm Nick Diakopoulous, a professor of communication studies and computer science at Northwestern University, where I direct the Computational Journalism Lab. Today, I'm happy to be able to share with you a bit about some research and thinking I've been doing in collaboration with a technology ethicist, Deborah Johnson at the University of Virginia, on the topic of synthetic media and our attempt to understand some of the ethical issues and harms that it creates. So I've actually just spent the better part of the last couple of years writing a book on the topic of news automation. It covers a lot of terrain related to the automated and algorithmically driven production of news media, from computational story discovery to automated writing systems, news bots, and algorithms and news distribution. And it was in the course of researching automated content production for the book that I first encountered this new wave of AI technology that is able to synthesize media. At the time, in 2017, which honestly feels like eons ago now, the technology was still very limited. But as it's gotten steadily better over the years, it has started raising some really interesting new challenges for the wider media ecosystem. So let's start with some definitions to make sure we're on the same page. When I say synthetic media, what I mean is artificial visual, audio, or textual communications that are produced using generative machine-learned models. I think of synthetic media as the broader phenomenon, but often we colloquially talk about deepfakes, which are a particular form of synthetic media, often portraying a person saying or doing something they did not say or do. So here's an example of a synthetic image that was generated from a model learned by analyzing a large data set of facial images. Actually, it was generated using a service called This Person Does Not Exist, using technology that's already more than 2 years old now. If you look closely, you can see some of the tells that it's synthetic. Synthetic media have already been weaponized online. Here's one example that Reuters uncovered recently. In this case, a deepfake image was used to create a made-up persona and offer cover to a writer who wanted to anonymously attack other people online. Now, in the video domain, face swapping technology initially gained notoriety due to its use in the creation of non-consensual pornography, where someone's face is swapped into an existing pornographic video. There are many issues here with the non-consensual swapping of faces, not least of which is its use to shame, humiliate, or intimidate women on the internet. Female journalists, for instance, have in fact already been attacked this way. Of course, these synthesis technologies are all also now working with audio. In this case, the managing director of a British energy company, believing his German boss to be on the phone, followed orders to wire more than $240,000 to a supposed supplier's account. The caller said the request was urgent, and so the director put it through. But of course, the whole thing turned out to be a scam perpetrated by people using voice synthesis technology. The same technologies that can be used for images, videos, and audio can also now be used to generate synthetic texts. Here's one system called Grover. You start by putting a sentence to prompt it, and you can set the outlet, and then it generates the article with a style matching the outlets. Even if it looks like news, it's all made up. In its current form, this is essentially a very powerful propaganda tool, and frankly, we really have almost no idea whether it or tools like it are being used to spread propaganda on social media. So all of this has been a bit of a preamble on the potential harms of deepfakes, but now I want to shift gears a bit and talk more about the specific project where we tried to systematically map out the dangers of deepfakes using an anticipatory ethics approach. As our domain of interest, we chose the 2020 US elections. And what we did was we iteratively developed 8 forward-looking scenarios which examined how the technology could potentially impact an election. I'm going to refer you to the paper for the full systematic process we followed there, but just to say a word or two, The overarching goal of the approach was to ensure that the scenarios that we developed were plausible and that they covered a broad range of potential uses. So we spent a lot of time grounding our scenarios in the current state-of-the-art capabilities of the technology, exploring a range of socio-technical configurations, including various actors, motivations, media modalities, distribution channels, and mechanisms of influence. We also incorporated a participatory approach, harnessing the insights and feedback of non-experts in order to help expand the range and diversity of perspectives represented. After we developed these scenarios, we used them as a basis for ethical analysis and used them to identify ethical harms and opportunities for intervention. So let's talk about specifics here. Based on our analysis of the scenarios, we identified several core harms that can come about from the use of Facebooks, including deception, intimidation, reputational harm, misattribution, and the undermining of trust in institutions. So let me talk about each of these in a bit more detail and give you some examples. So deception is a key one here, and it really dominated our scenarios. In the domain of elections, deception is a really profound harm to individuals because it undermines their ability to make informed decisions in their own best interests. False information about candidates could distort a voter's reasoning about how to vote. We've already seen the harm of deepfakes used to intimidate women through deepfake pornography, and this is a really huge issue online. These tools are easy to use and cheap to hire as a service. We know that women are at a greater threat to harassment online. Now, in the context of elections, we thought that one of the threats could be against individuals who might be targeted and intimidated not to vote in a similar way. Clearly, there's a potential for reputational harm from deepfakes, as individuals can be made to look like they said or did something that they didn't. In the context of elections, reputation is essentially the main commodity of the campaigns. Campaigns are interested in shaping the beliefs about who a candidate is, what the candidate has and hasn't done, what kind of character the candidate has, and so on. And so there's a lot at stake with deepfakes that might undermine someone's reputation. In our scenarios, we mostly considered how reputation could be attacked with deepfakes, but to some extent, we also explored the potential to misuse deepfakes to bolster a reputation or credibility. So for instance, a candidate could be falsely portrayed in an act of valor, or an endorsement from someone with a lot of credibility to a particular constituency could be faked. Now, independent of the reputational harm here, there seems to be an additional harm in using and distributing an individual's image or likeness without their consent. In our paper, we actually argue that there's a new harm here, which we call persona plagiarism, a sort of inversion of plagiarism focused on the source rather than the content of a message. Plagiarism is fundamentally about misattribution, right? So person A presents person B's words and takes credit for them, claiming the words to be their own. In persona plagiarism, person A takes person B's persona, that is their likeness and their voice, and inserts their own expression, their own words, according to their own goals, thus misattributing that expression to person B. So that's the case where you might want to put words in a specific other person's mouth. Another way to use misattribution is to create an entirely fake persona and use it to provide anonymity to the words of the actual speaker. The last harm we identified relates to how deepfakes could be used to attack trust in the election process. So for instance, a deepfake might be used to suggest cheating in some election process like debates, or to cloud the public perceptions of the voting process itself. Of course, all the other harms I've talked about can also contribute to undermining trust in elections. So for instance, deception, reputational harm, and misattribution distort how voters might perceive candidates. Even if an individual viewer is aware of some manipulation, he or she may not believe that others are also aware, which could degrade their trust in the ability of others to make well-informed voting decisions. Now, once we understand these harms that can arise from deepfakes, we can start thinking about how different intervention strategies can address those harms. So here I'll consider 4 potential interventions and how they impact the ethical dimensions that we identified. These aren't the only forms of intervention, of course. And we leave open the possibility for exploring future interventions as well. The approach we took in the paper was based on forward-looking responsibility analysis. So instead of trying to define interventions around actors that are blameworthy, we think about what actors can actively do in the future to mitigate potential harms, and who is in the best position to mitigate potential harms. So the first intervention strategy I'll talk about is education and media literacy. The idea here is that individuals could be encouraged to develop an awareness of the capabilities of technology so as to be able to spot characteristic flaws in deepfakes. Even if it does little to address the sources and motivations for the production of deepfakes, by equipping viewers with critical assessment abilities, this strategy is somewhat compelling because it directly mitigates the potential for deception and could also diminish reputational harm by reducing amplification via social channels. An unintended consequence of increased public education about deepfakes could be the possibility of what Chesney and Citron have termed the liar's dividend. This is the idea that an individual, as individuals learn to be more critical and skeptical of media, they may begin to doubt real video and audio evidence. This in turn could make it easier for some users of deepfakes to deny and cast doubt on the occurrence of real events. The next intervention I want to talk about is subject defense. This is really about helping to protect people who are at risk of being deepfaked. Now, in the election context, campaigns could adopt a reactive strategy of monitoring platforms where deepfakes circulate so that any manipulated representations of the candidate could be quickly debunked. In addition to detection, campaigns might create crisis response teams with connections to experts that can help with debunking or with legal strategy. And this could help with reducing deception and misattribution harms. But it's also important to think about the potential limitations of reactive approaches. Not all media platforms can be monitored because of private or encrypted communications. The effectiveness of legal responses will be limited because correctly identifying the legally accountable source of a deepfake and reaching perpetrators outside the jurisdiction of the US legal processes is very challenging. Moreover, reactive defense interventions don't stop the deepfake from being seen. They either counter the disinformation with accurate information or they hinder its spread. Reactive strategies also can't operate at a speed commensurate with the spread of media on many platforms. Verification is a potentially very powerful antidote to deepfakes through the use of automated or semi-automated verification techniques. Might help reveal how media was created. Verification techniques increase the likelihood that fakes will be identified as such, and therefore they'll minimize harm to viewers. Verification can also provide support to other intervention strategies, so it's a useful assist. For instance, it can augment the efficacy of subject defense strategies by helping to identify misattribution, and it can work in the service of legal interventions by tracing provenance and helping attribute media to an accountable entity. One of the issues with automated techniques for detecting and verifying media is that they introduce the potential for some media to be detected as fake when it is not. Parody and satire might be weeded out along with deceptive content. And so automated verification techniques will need to be paired with expert human moderators capable of more subtle assessments. Finally, I want to talk about publicity modulation, which is about thinking carefully about how deepfake videos are promoted or distributed. The forward-looking responsibility for modulating publicity should be shared, but would be most effective if the publishers that produce the largest amounts of publicity had the largest responsibility. For instance, social or search platforms might consider banning deepfakes, throttling their distribution, or including counterspeech like labels to indicate the nature and veracity of video content. The three options, banning, throttling, and counterspeech, each address ethical harms somewhat differently, which I don't have time to go into in detail right now. But finally, I just kind of want to wrap things up, given the time constraint, and say that I think what our analysis makes clear is that future work should seek to explore these intervention strategies further by advancing technology, fleshing out policy and legal frameworks, and helping to establish an empirical basis for comparing intervention efficacy. Here are some papers that are the basis of my presentation, as well as my contact details in case you'd like to be in touch. Thanks so much.